The night was silent in a way that felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspoken truths. I sat in the darkness of our living room, the dim glow of the streetlight outside painting long, uneven shadows across the walls, and I realized I had been living beside a stranger for months, maybe years, without truly seeing her. Every laugh we shared, every conversation, every mundane morning ritual now seemed like fragments of a life that wasn't entirely real. The scent of her perfume lingered on the coat she had left by the door, and with it came a hollow echo of familiarity, one I could no longer trust. I remember the exact moment a question first burned in my mind, a question I had buried under routines and assumptions. Where do you go when you say you are working late? The phrase had become a mantra over time, a polite lie I had allowed myself to accept. But tonight, the quiet gnawed at me, urging me to see, to follow, to confront what my own eyes had refused to believe. The city was asleep, or at least it seemed so, and yet, in that stillness, I could feel every small betrayal as if it were a physical weight pressing against my chest. By the time I reached the street where she said her office was, the truth was already in motion. A taxi pulled up, and she stepped out, not alone, not on a phone call, not buried in papers, but with someone else. The world felt like it paused in that instant, my heartbeat echoing too loudly in my ears. Questions I had been too polite to ask for months screamed for answers. And in the silence that followed, I understood something I would never unlearn. Some truths do not arrive quietly, they strike, and the aftermath lingers far longer than the act itself. I first met her when the city was still soft around the edges, when evenings smelled of rain on asphalt and street lamps glimmered with unhurried warmth. She worked in a small design studio tucked between a laundromat and a cafe, a place where the hum of the copier and the faint clatter of coffee cups created a rhythm I found strangely comforting. I was 27, newly settled into a life of predictable work and quiet ambition, and she was 25, with a laugh that drew people in and a meticulous attention to detail that betrayed her inner discipline. Our first conversation had been banal comments about the weather, the studio's overcrowded meeting room, but beneath it was a subtle magnetism I didn't understand at the time. We started slowly, dinners after work, walks along the river where the lights of the city flickered on water that seemed to absorb our words and reflections. I was cautious, too aware of the fragility of human connection, and she was patient, gentle, like someone who knew the art of slow persuasion. We married 2 years later, not with grand declarations but with quiet certainty, a small ceremony with only our closest friends. In those early months, our life was a series of small joys. Cooking together, debating the merits of the old bookstore down the street, staying up late to watch films neither of us would admit to loving. There was contentment, yes, but also the sense that happiness is always fragile, that it depends on attention and care, and that neglect, even slight, can erode it faster than storms erode a coastline. At first, the late nights were genuine. She worked long hours designing interiors for high-paying clients who demanded perfection. I admired her diligence, sometimes staying up to wait for her, leaving a light on, only to fall asleep on the sofa with the television murmuring quietly. But slowly, patterns began to shift. Calls that ended abruptly, excuses that seemed rehearsed, smells in her coat that weren't hers. They accumulated like small cracks in a wall, each imperceptible on its own, but together forming something impossible to ignore. I told myself I was imagining things, that suspicion was a dangerous lens through which to view someone you love. Yet, the doubt lingered, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of our lives. I started noting the hours she claimed to work late, the days she returned earlier than expected, the slight fatigue in her voice when she lied. I did not confront her. Confrontation requires courage I did not yet have. Instead, I watched quietly, cataloging patterns, preparing myself for a revelation I feared but knew was inevitable. The decision to follow her was impulsive, a mix of dread and necessity. I chose a Thursday, a night when the air was thick with humidity and the streets glistened with remnants of rain. I left the house pretending to walk the dog, though the leash hung slack in my hand. I parked a few blocks away from her supposed office, heart pounding in a rhythm I could barely contain. Hours passed slowly. I saw colleagues leave, the office lights dim, and then the taxi, the first sign that my suspicions were not just figments of imagination. She emerged, not carrying work files, not on a call, but walking with a man whose presence filled the space between them with familiarity I had only ever imagined in worst-case scenarios. I followed silently, my body tense, my mind racing through memories, the shared breakfasts, The stolen kisses in the kitchen, the late-night talks that had seemed intimate, but now felt like rehearsed performances. They entered a small apartment several blocks away, a place I had never seen, a world I had never been invited into. My hands trembled as I scribbled down the address, a futile attempt to anchor reality against the storm raging inside me. I drove home slowly, retracing my steps with careful attention to avoid being noticed, yet each turn felt like a betrayal of the life I had tried to preserve. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the coat she had left on the hook, at the faint perfume that clung stubbornly to its fabric. I remembered the early days of our love, the small, tangible moments that had made me believe in permanence. And I realized with a gut-deep ache that some moments, no matter how real they felt at the time, are only chapters in a story you cannot control. Over the next few weeks, our routine continued as if nothing had changed. She went to work, came home late, smiled politely, and I smiled back, careful to mask the storm inside me. I became adept at compartmentalization, emotions locked away in a drawer, my life functioning on autopilot while my mind replayed the truths I had witnessed. I watched her through the lens of restraint, noting gestures, patterns, the subtle language of deception, all while pretending to engage in ordinary life. Friends asked why I seemed distant. I said work was stressful, that life had grown monotonous. But the monotony was only a cover for the chaos of betrayal I could not confront openly. Eventually, curiosity led me to the apartment she frequented. I never approached the door. I observed from a distance, noting the lights, the comings and goings, the small routines of a life she had built outside the one we shared. Each observation tore at the foundations of trust I had spent years cultivating, leaving me suspended in a liminal space between knowledge and denial. I realized love is not only tested by grand acts, but by the quiet erosion of presence, by the subtle displacement of attention and affection. The realization was neither dramatic nor sudden. It was a slow, accumulating weight that settled in my chest like a stone refusing to be dislodged. At work, I became withdrawn, careful not to reveal the fissures in my personal life. Meetings blurred together, my focus fragmented, yet externally I maintained composure. Evenings were the hardest. The apartment echoed with absence, with the ghost of her presence, and I wrestled with questions I had no answers for. How long had it been this way? Was love enough to forgive deception? Could a life once built together withstand a betrayal so thorough, so deliberate? The answers eluded me, leaving only the persistent ache of knowing that nothing could ever be as it had seemed. Her confrontations were rare, her explanations rehearsed. She spoke of stress, of demanding clients, of nights spent alone in the office to meet deadlines. I believed her words on the surface, but ignored the inconsistencies, because acknowledging them would force an immediate reckoning I was not prepared for. The house, once a sanctuary, became a theater of careful observation, where I navigated my own suspicion with quiet discipline, hiding the truth from everyone, including myself. The months stretched on, marked by small discoveries, receipts left behind, messages on her phone glimpsed by accident, unfamiliar fragrances. Each piece of evidence confirmed what I already feared, yet I continued to live in the same house, sharing meals, maintaining the semblance of a life together. It was as if I were observing a painting, fully aware of the cracks beneath the surface, yet powerless to alter the brushstrokes that had already been laid. Then came the night. I finally decided to confront her, not with anger, but with the quiet, inexorable resolve of someone who had cataloged every lie, every evasion, every subtle betrayal. I found her in the kitchen, preparing a late snack, her movements casual, unaware that the man behind the eyes she had trusted most was no longer blinded by love or denial. I spoke softly, without accusation, recounting details only someone who had followed, who had observed, could know. Her face shifted through surprise, guilt, deflection, and finally resignation. She said nothing at first, only stared, a mirror reflecting the culmination of months of secrecy. And in that silence, I understood fully. The life we had shared, the laughter, the routines, the intimacy, had been irrevocably altered. We were no longer two people sharing a path. We were two strangers acknowledging a fracture that would define the rest of our lives. That night I did not scream. I did not weep. I merely sat, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of the city, and allowed the truth to settle into its permanent place. The months that followed were quiet and deliberate. We separated our lives within the same walls, coexisting with careful routines, a minimalist interaction of shared responsibilities, each act of civility underpinned by unspoken understanding. I moved through the motions of daily life, cataloging each moment of normalcy against the backdrop of betrayal, slowly reconstructing a sense of self that had been fragmented by knowledge. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive revelation, just the gradual acceptance that life, once intertwined, can diverge without fanfare, leaving only the echoes of what was lost. I focused on work, friends, and solitary evenings that once felt oppressive, but now became a sanctuary for reflection. I wrote long letters I never sent, revisited memories with the clarity of hindsight, and learned to distinguish between love and attachment, between comfort and complacency. The process was neither quick nor neat. It was a painstaking reconstruction of identity, a slow acclimation to the reality that some people we love are capable of living a life parallel to ours, unseen and unshared. Eventually, I moved into a small apartment, a space chosen deliberately for its quiet anonymity. Each object I placed, there was a testament to new beginnings. A lamp that cast a warm, controlled glow. A chair that fit precisely in the corner I designated for reading. A rug that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I carried with me the lessons of my previous life, the acute awareness that love is fragile, trust is conditional, and that human connection is both a balm and a potential wound. I did not seek revenge, nor did I seek reconciliation. I sought clarity, and the clarity I found was both painful and liberating. Years passed. I watched from a distance as she moved forward, her life intersecting with others in ways I would never be part of, and I did the same, forming new bonds cautiously, deliberately, always mindful of the impermanence of trust. I learned to navigate relationships with tempered expectations, to observe quietly, to value transparency over appearances. And in the quiet moments, when the city was still and the air held the faint smell of rain, I allowed myself to acknowledge the depth of the loss. Not the absence of love, but the absence of truth. It came with a subdued light that filtered through half-closed blinds, washing my apartment in a pale, deliberate calm. I sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of black coffee in hand, and for the first time in years, I did not feel the gnawing tension that had once defined every waking hour. The apartment was silent, unencumbered by the echoes of another life, and yet the memories lingered at the edges of perception. The sound of her laugh, the tilt of her head as she listened, the soft rustle of her coat when she left. They were ghosts, distant and untouchable, reminders of a story I had lived and survived. Time had become my only companion. Days followed predictable patterns, but each day carried the quiet weight of reflection. I found solace in small routines, morning runs along the river, late evenings spent reading on the worn sofa, grocery trips timed to avoid crowds. In these moments, the world felt expansive yet intimate, a place where control was possible, where betrayal could not infiltrate. I came to understand that healing is rarely loud. It whispers through discipline, consistency, and the patient reconstruction of self. Her presence in my life became like a photograph hung in the corner of a room, visible only when attention drifted, impossible to ignore, but distant enough to no longer wound. We existed on parallel tracks, intersecting only in moments dictated by necessity. Shared bills, family events, casual greetings. Each interaction was an exercise in restraint, a balancing act between acknowledgement and detachment. I noticed her aging slowly, subtly lines at the corners of her eyes, the softening of her posture, but I observed these changes as one might observe a stranger, detached yet unavoidably human. I too changed. The quiet, patient life I had carved out became a mirror of internal recalibration. I learned to notice the small details others missed, the way sunlight fell on a building, the rhythm of traffic in early morning, the fleeting expression of a stranger in a cafe. Each observation was a reclamation of attention, a conscious redirection from what had been stolen by deceit. In embracing the mundanity of existence, I found a strange kind of freedom. The absence of lies allowed me to inhabit reality fully, to measure life without distortion, to live without the constant anxiety of suspicion. One evening, I encountered a woman in a bookstore, a place where I often lost myself among shelves of quiet narratives. She was reaching for the same volume, fingers brushing against mine, and for the first time in years, I felt an unexpected flutter of connection, not desire but recognition. We began to speak slowly at first, exchanging thoughts on literature, art, and fleeting moments of life. There was no rush, no expectation. only the gradual unfolding of conversation and the unspoken promise of mutual understanding. It was the first time I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not by replicating the past, but by creating a new framework, cautious, deliberate, and honest. Our interactions developed over months, quiet and unhurried. I did not seek to replace what I had lost, only to experience what I had been denied. Companionship built on transparency, empathy, and genuine interest. In these small moments, I recognized that love is not a singular narrative, but a series of choices repeated over time, and that the fractures of the past need not dictate the potential of the present. The process was neither linear nor easy. I wrestled with lingering doubts, the residue of old betrayals, and the cautious awareness that vulnerability is always a risk. Meanwhile, the life I had left behind continued on its separate trajectory. I occasionally glimpsed her from a distance, her laughter with new acquaintances, the subtle gestures that once belonged to me, the traces of intimacy now shared elsewhere. At first, these observations were sharp, like shards against my chest, but over time they dulled into mere recognition. I no longer felt ownership over her existence, only the quiet acknowledgement that people move, evolve, and intersect in ways beyond our control. Acceptance became the vessel through which I measured my own growth. Family gatherings brought another dimension of reckoning. Relatives, unaware of the nuances of our separation, treated us as a unified couple, expecting performances of civility. I learned to navigate these spaces with careful neutrality, offering polite conversation while guarding the fragile equilibrium of my internal life. Each smile, each handshake, each casual inquiry was a reminder of the duality of human interaction, the outer performance versus inner reality. I discovered the power of subtlety, that endurance often speaks louder than confrontation, and that survival is sometimes a quiet, invisible act of courage. Months later, I moved further into the rhythm of self-sufficiency. The apartment, once a temporary refuge, became a home. I adorned it with objects that reflected personal taste rather than shared history. A small collection of paintings I had admired for years, books carefully curated for solitary reading, furniture arranged for comfort and function. Every choice was deliberate, an assertion of autonomy and an affirmation of life reclaimed. I came to understand that identity, once fractured, can be reconstructed with intention, patience, and quiet resilience. Love, when it returned, was unhurried. I did not seek to erase the past or to demand explanations beyond what had been necessary for closure. Instead, I approached connection with humility and awareness, appreciating the slow unfolding of trust and the subtle accumulation of intimacy. It was a love that did not replicate the intensity of youthful passion, but one grounded in mutual respect, shared experience, and the conscious choice to engage fully with another human being. Years passed with this rhythm: work, quiet reflection, deliberate companionship, and solitary walks that carried the weight of memory and the promise of the present. The betrayal that had once defined the trajectory of my life became a shadow visible yet distant, acknowledged yet powerless to disrupt. I learned to carry it without resentment, as a reminder of fragility and the necessity of vigilance in matters of the heart. One late evening, I walked along the river where we had once strolled together, the water reflecting the city lights like scattered fragments of a dream. The wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of rain, and I allowed myself to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The love, the betrayal, the quiet endurance, the gradual reconstruction of self. I understood finally that life is composed of intersections, choices, and consequences, and that the weight of truth, once confronted, can be transformed into clarity and eventually into peace. I did not seek reconciliation with the past, nor did I dwell in anger. Instead, I carried forward with quiet purpose, honoring the lessons learned through loss and the resilience cultivated through betrayal. The city continued its slow rhythm around me, indifferent to human suffering yet generous in offering spaces for reflection, growth, and new beginnings. I walked with deliberate steps, each one a testament to survival, to awareness, and to the unspoken understanding that life, in its quiet persistence, offers redemption not through circumstance, but through the deliberate choices of those who endure. In the end, the story was not about her, nor solely about the betrayal. It was about the reclamation of self, the quiet endurance of truth, and the realization that love, while fragile, is infinitely resilient when tempered by clarity and lived experience. I had emerged from the shadows of deception not unscathed, but intact, wiser, and prepared to navigate life with a quiet, earned strength. The river reflected my own passage, steady, unhurried, moving forward, carrying the fragments of the past toward a horizon I could finally face without fear. Life, I realized, does not offer closure in dramatic gestures or sweeping reconciliations. It offers small, persistent truths, quiet choices, and the opportunity to walk forward with deliberate awareness. And in that walk, I found not only freedom but an understanding deeper than grief, stronger than anger, and more enduring than regret.